Hi, welcome to this lecture. Now, in order to understand faceting, we are going to use this dataset, which is air quality measurements in New York. So we can see here, these measurements, they are from May to September. So you should also remember that, because we also want to see how can we create our own dataset from this dataset and try to manipulate and create our own factors. So these are the set of variables that we have in this data set. Okay, so now what we want to do first, we want to go to this data set, air quality, and let us look at this column, which is month. You can see the month starts from the 5th month up until the 9th. So that is from May up until July. Okay, so what we're first going to do is we're going to create our own data set, and we're going to call it air, and we want to copy this data set. So as you can see, this data set air, it has all the columns from this data set. Okay, so our main aim in this case is we want to create our own factor, and we're also going to call it month. Okay, now let's come here and say from air, what I want to do is I want to take this column, right? And I'm also going to use this factor function to try and create these factors with factor labels. And I'm also going to add the labels, and I'm going to create, say, this is May, then it's going to be June. Okay, now we have created this column month. It's now a factor. So let's see head of air. So if you run this, so you can see now we have this month and it's now a factor. You can even verify that by looking at the structure of this data frame. Okay, so you can see now it's a factor with 5 factor levels. Now, what we want to do here, we are going to create the density plots of the New York temperatures by month. Okay, so in order to do that, we're going to use ggplot. So I'm going to come in here and say gg. Right, so notice that I'm also going to create a variable, and we're going to say ggplot. Okay, and our data set is air. We're now using air. So now let us specify the aesthetics. So in order to specify the aesthetics, so here we want the temperature. Okay, remember we had temp, so we want temperature. But I also want to say here, I want to fill this by month so that we can be able to create the density plots of these New York temperatures by month. Okay, so if we run this, then we call this object. Now, we also want to add, remember we want to create the density plots. So it's going to be density, and if you run this, so we have managed to create these density plots. So I'm also going to come here and I'm going to try and modify the transparency, let's say 0.4. And if you run this, so now it looks much clearer. Okay, now after modifying the transparency, what I also want to do is I want to also add the title. So it's gg title. So in this case, I'm simply just adding the features that so this is monthly temperature probability densities. Let's say probability densities. So let's run this. Okay, what I also want to add is I also want to add the x labels as well as the y labels. So for the x-axis, I'm going to come and say this is temperature. The unit of measure is Fahrenheit. For the y-axis, this here is simply just going to say this is density. Okay, let's run this. So we've managed to modify the X labels as well as the Y labels. Now, what I want to do is I want us to understand how can we use facet wrap first. So in order to do that, I'm going to come in here, and instead of modifying this, I'm simply just going to assign this and say GG. All right. So if I call this plot, so you can see now what we want to do is we first want to use facet wrap by month. So we come in here and say facet underscore wrap. So when we come inside here, we specify by month. Okay, so let's run this. So what has happened now is that we have managed to create the densities for each month. Okay, we also have our legend. So that is how facet wrap works. We only specify this to say we want the subplot by month. Okay, now we can also have additional arguments. Say for example, we come in here and say we want the number of rows to be 1. So if you run this, so you observe we now only have one number of rows, but this has managed to separate all of these into different subplots. So also if we come in here and say maybe we specify 2, so we can see we have 2 number of rows. We can also specify 3 to have 3 number of rows. Now we also have additional arguments, and that argument is scale. So let's see how this argument works. So if we come in here and say scales, and we assign this to 3, and we run this, and what you can also observe is that we have allowed each of these subplots to have its own different range in terms of the scale. Okay, we specify scales to be 3 in that case.